Hey, this is Zac.
And I'm Clint, and we wanted to thank Exo-terra for sponsoring this episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Exo-terra is the industry leader in glass terrarium enclosures, and we are a big fan of getting to see the species we work with both at home and at the university.
We utilize Exo-terra caging here at Metazotics, and in addition to top quality terrariums, Exo-terra offers an array of heating options, lighting, supplements, decor, and truthfully anything needed or wanted when keeping reptiles.
Thank you, Exo-terra, for supporting Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. Zac here, as always, with brother from another mother, Clint. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fantastic, my good man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. This was the last week of summer, by my definition.
I'll say not by the temperature.
Yeah. So. The new grad students are back from Iowa. This is their first week actually in West Liberty. They're at West Liberty for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, I have undergrads out in Iowa because we can't give up the data because the snakes didn't get the memo. It's the end of the summer. So they're gathering data. Grad students are getting trained, and then they're going to go back out, and it's like this incredibly complicated piece. If you all see a West Liberty vehicle on I-70 going west on a Sunday or going east on a Saturday, there's a high likelihood those are my students. So we're doing this all the way up through the end of October, I think. Of course, funded by the Colubridfest auction and other means. So, yeah, the data that we're getting is insane. I'm going to talk about that real quick. Is that cool?
Yeah, please do.
We'll keep preaching about this project being both herpetology and herpiculture at the same time. That's extremely important to me. I'm doing everything in my power to make sure we hit that goal as the primary investigator or PI. That's what you call the person in charge of the research project. And so I was talking with my graduate student, Alyssa, who very proud of her. She's a data miner, which is awesome. So every time we catch a snake, because they're pit tagged, we weigh them, we measure them, we release them, we get a GIS coordinate, decimal degree, if you're a field person. Write that down. And then Dawn, our colleague out in Iowa, who's an amazing programmer, has this app that is crazy awesome. So when we find the snakes, we have a pit tag reader that's Bluetooth enabled. So we just zap the snake. It sends the alpha tag to the app. The app then looks up all the previous records. And then in real time, you can see a Google map that shows everywhere that snake was at. And for the GIS people, it creates the minimum polygon of home range size for that animal in real time, which is insane. When I was in grad school, it took me 3 weeks to do that once. We do it with every single snake we catch. So pretty important stuff. And what is very interesting is since we take the weight on all the snakes, we have some snakes we keep catching, and we are catching at a wonderful interval. It's almost like they know science because they're like, I'm going to sacrifice myself to the trap every 20 days, which is pretty amazing. So we have real-time growth data on things like colubrid racers and garter snakes and hognose snakes. And so we haven't analyzed the data. We have looked at a couple of the animals, though, and I'm just going to let out a little tidbit, a little sneak peek of what we're looking at with this project. So obviously a biggie. How often do you feed your snakes? What is a normal growth rate? That is a baseline question you cannot answer in herpiculture unless you have data from the field. And to make a very long story short, I'm not going to give the exact details, but we have evidence. I'm not saying to feed your snakes a lot of food. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is these things are growing a lot faster than I thought possible. We have them growing literally more than an inch in a month.
Wow. Which
is insane. And you're not growing that quickly if you don't have the calories to power the growth. But it was a major head scratcher when Alyssa started telling me, like, some of these, now it's racers. We don't keep racers that often in human care, but we have one racer that we caught in early May, right when it came out of brumation. Sorry. Yeah. That you could clearly see the racer pattern on it. It is now, we caught it the last time I was out there, which is like a week and a half ago. The pattern is going away. That animal in like 2.5 months, I think it's been 3.5 months, however many months it's been. It's grown like 8 inches
Jeez.
which is insane. I did not think it would do that. The garters have a similar, some of the garters have a similar growth rate, but meanwhile, we have hognose snakes out there. Some of them are growing gangbusterly, new word. Others are like barely growing at all. So my little naturalist scientist brain is exploding, but directly correlative to answering some baseline questions. Because when you boil it down to a very applied level, we don't know how much these things grow in the wild. Nobody has taken bull snakes and studied them in the wild because they're not, for this particular question, because they're just not easy to catch again. Well, we have a couple that we caught a bunch. I'm going to release the bull snake data here in a little bit. I'm very excited about the bull snake data because I keep freaking bull snakes. Yeah, so that's just like one little tidbit that's come out of the summer, which I thought was very interesting. It blew me away. I was not prepared for this. In fact, it might even become one of Alyssa's thesis chapters, which is what's the background growth rate of snakes in the wild. And that is directly correlative to us in herpiculture that keep colubrids knowing like what is a good growth rate. And by my standard, I would say that would be the growth rate you would see in a power fed animal. So I don't know. Fun stuff. So that's that little tidbit.
Definitely.
And then I've lost my mind, absolutely lost my mind with my collection. Lucas Lee, my former grad student, listens to the show, another member of our network. He's on Carpets and Coffee. He reached out to me and said, "Do you want this green anaconda?" To which I promptly replied, "No, just NO." And then Lucas talked to me, and I am now the proud owner of a female anaconda. Now, the anaconda is like multiple years old, and it's not even 4 feet yet. So anyway, and I already have an insurance policy. It may be part of the Zoosci collection. It may not be. It was captive born. It's growing very slowly. I think that's due to what we just talked about in the caloric intake. Wasn't Lucas's classic large snake. It's been handed off to Lucas, and then Lucas was given the task of finding a forever home for it. Mm-hmm. So that, and then I was at the Pittsburgh Reptile Show, and I have the Gila monsters, and I thought, beaded lizards would be cool. And so right after I got an anaconda, it was only right for me to get 2, not 1, 2 exasperatum. If you know which one that Sonoran, that's not it. They have a funky common name, but Heloderma exasperatum, the northernmost beaded lizards. They're currently right over here. There you go. So anyway, I had a moment driving to work where I was like, you're breaking all those rules you tell the kids not to break in like a week. So it's been my week of rebellion, but hopefully I don't grow to I don't know. Anywho, and then I went to the Columbus Reptile Show, and I went to the Columbus Reptile Show to give a bunch of stuff to the Zirkles, because we're offloading animals right now. And then I had a deal with a guy with false water cobras, and I needed to offload babies. And if you were at the Columbus Reptile Show and you came up to me and said, "Hey, Zac," and I looked at you in a quizzical way, will be nice. I am sorry. I am not used to people talking to me, and I normally zip in and zip out of the Reptile Show. So to anybody that I like spun on that said, "Hey, Zac," and gave you a look, that was not my intention. I was just so blown away by all the people that were talking to me about the show, about Colubridfest, about all that Clint and I do. So thank you for, communicating. But I just was not, I have to mentally prepare myself for human interaction. And I had not prepared myself. I cannot do this like Clint does. So you all know.
I got a phone call immediately after he walked out of that show. Is it always like this at shows for you?
Yeah.
I love it.
Thank you all. Okay. So those are my updates. I'm done.
Gotcha. I got kind of a lot of stuff going on, man. And a few things that I want to ask the listeners for, but to start with updates, I mean, we are kind of, up to the gills at this point with babies. It's, I've said it episode after episode that, poor Corey. And, I keep telling her, hey, we're going to have all these events and things coming up that a lot of these babies will be moving. You'll be okay. We'll send some more to Henderson. You'll be okay. But yeah, we're definitely, but I still, like, it's funny because every time I walk into the shop, I walk into the office, I set down everything I got in my hands and I go straight to the incubator because I want to see what's out, what has hatched today. And it's cool and it's neat. And I almost took a picture earlier, but I didn't get around to it. So I'll take one after they shed out. But so we've got some scaleless corns, that we dabble with out here. And I was going to take a, picture of this box of all these baby scaleless and just call it, my box of abomination. Cause I know how many people hate scaleless, but when it comes to scaleless corns, those colors are just insane. So, but it was funny because we had the scaleless male actually that picked up at Colubridfest, won it in the auction and bred it to a het scaleless female, 2 het scaleless females. The first clutch hatched out and there's like 18 babies, no scaleless. And this is a proven het scaleless female. I'm like, really? And then we hatch out the second clutch. There's 20 eggs, 18 of them scaleless.
Well, there you go.
I'm like,
the odds.
I'm like, okay, I guess that, balance things out. But yes, that was a pretty just neat clutch to see today. So fun stuff. Lots going on there. And I got motivated here recently.
You did.
I did. So, okay, where I'm going with this. So we've hatched out, so here at Metazotics as well as Matt Most, because I've got, babies that we still do so many joint black rat snake projects together that some of them are at his place, some of them are here. And there's a bunch of babies coming that he hatched out, some lemon rats, things like that. So we've got so many baby black rats, and inevitably you can probably guess one of the questions I get incredibly often whenever I am posting, or if someone sees ads or whatnot for a baby black rat mutation, it's, do you have any adult pics? That they want to see what these look like as adults. And I get that question so often that, and I've wanted to do this forever. But finally I'm like, you know what? I'm looking, I've got enough pictures. And I went back and I started counting how many different black rat mutations, either single gene or combos that we have. And I think it was like 25, 26 different, and so I'm like, we've got most of what has been produced in the black rat, line right here. So I decided to start taking pictures of these adults. And then it dawned on me, I've already got pictures of most of these as babies, as hatchlings.
Yeah.
And so what I'm looking to do now is I'm currently building a page on the site that is going to have pictures of both a hatchling and we'll say subadult to adult, depending on what it is, of these different mutations and combos so that people can not only see what an adult looks like, but can hopefully it will help them to identify certain babies when they hatch out because they can look so similar and it's difficult. But I want to take it a step further. And that's where I've made some posts about this. It's been shared and I've been getting some information and contact info, but I want to put it out there to our listeners. Please email me or message me on Facebook, either one, what I am now looking for. I'm not looking for pictures at the moment. I think I'm probably going to have most of those taken care of. If not, I'll reach out and, solicit to see if I can get any. And once I have the page built and rolled out, if there are combinations that you have that I don't have pictured, then let's talk, so we can get those. But what I'm needing more than anything is what I find the most interesting in any morph, single gene morph out there. I want to know the history.
Yep.
I want to know where it came from. I want to know, did it pop up in someone's collection? Was it found? Where was it found? Was it raining that day? I want to know what happened. It's like knowing the story behind the lightning black rat from Scott and Scott Hitchcock. That I know everything. He put a ladder against a tree in a thunderstorm to go catch this snake, and that's why it's called the lightning. I want to know that. So if you have the information or know who has the information on any of the color mutations out there, with the exception of the lemon and the calico, I've got that one hands down. That was 90 minutes from here. Will Bird, know all about it. It's in their book. Got that one. Those two. But other than that, please message me those histories, because I really want to build this page, because I think it's another cool thing for the community that will really help out. So thanks. As far as what else is going on out here at Metazotics, we are slammed. I mean, it's now the time where when this episode airs, because we are recording on a Monday night and it's going to air the Wednesday after this one. Or is it Monday?
Yeah.
It is. Okay.
Here we are, man.
Right. I know. So when this airs, that weekend, so the Saturday, this will air on a Wednesday, and this coming Saturday will be our anniversary event here at Metazotics. And that is huge. It is hands down our largest volume day of the year. We do more in that day than we'll do in 1 to 2 weeks sometimes. I mean, it's incredible. We have to have volunteers and all that. And this year, we're not only doing it at the original shop, we're doing it at 2 stores.
I was going to say, is Henderson involved?
Yes. And so we had to completely map all that out. And, big shout out and thanks to my vendors, that I get product from. And that's going to be Exo-terra. Obviously, they take great care of us. ZoomEd does it, Reptile Basics, Vivarium Electronics, because all of them are donating product for our giveaways that we do. So that's super exciting. The reason I want to share something about the anniversary event on the show is because if you do listen to this before the weekend, so if you're one of the listeners that get to it right away, the specials that make this event so massive are online this weekend as well. They go live at 9:30 a.m. Central on Saturday, August 23rd, and they will run until midnight Monday morning, so 12:01 Monday morning. And everything is on sale. So every animal that we have, if you're not looking for product, no problem. Every animal that we have is going to be marked down. And this is, again, our biggest event of the year. And I would love for our listeners to be able to participate in it too, if they so choose. So that's what really the next week and a half is it's prep. I mean, I'm already having to start loading in all the discounts to go live, because it takes me, I think, usually 3 days to input all the discounts that we have to put in, because it's everything in the store. Or in our entire inventory docket. So it's massive, for sure. The other thing that I want to talk about briefly, and start putting it out there, because it's going to get here before we know it. I mean, so for Metazotics, we've got the anniversary event in a week and a half. Then we just have a matter of weeks and we're at Colubridfest.
We are.
And then it's just a couple weeks after that and I'm hitting Tinley. And then it's, then it's going to be the day after Thanksgiving. I mean, I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving just to have a day off. But with all that rolling, I want to start talking about donations.
Yes.
For Colubridfest, and how those work. If you are attending Colubridfest and you want to donate for the auction, which we are extremely grateful if you do.
Yes.
If you want to donate for the auction, bring it in. Bring it with you. And whether you're coming in Friday night, Saturday, whatever, we can go ahead and take, possession of whatever it is that you're giving. If it's a live animal, great. Make sure it's in something that it is secured and visible. So deli cup, please, so that we can show it at the auction. And if it is anything that's non-living, that is readily accepted too. It doesn't all have to be reptile related. If you think it's something we had Andrew donated a compound bow last year. Yeah. One of our other regulars here donated a lot of liquor, and that always does very well at auctions. So, that's a good thing. But just anything that you want to donate that you think is going to help generate funds and help us have a good time out there, please do. If you are not attending Colubridfest, if there is a non-living item that you would like to donate, those can be shipped to Metazotics, and I will haul all of it up there for the auction. We did some of that last year. If you're anywhere local to Metazotics or local to, because you're driving in too, right?
Yeah.
Yep. If you're local to Zac, Yep.
There you go.
Drop it off. We'll drive it in. If it is a live animal that you're wanting to donate and you're not attending, we had some of that last year. David Powell, thank you, buddy. I remember, specifically. We can have you ship that to our local FedEx hub right here, which is 7 minutes from Metazotics. I was there just before we started recording.
If you're closer to me, you can also ship it to the Wheeling hub.
Mm-hmm. Either or. And we will arrange with you because basically I like to have that arrive that Thursday just to make sure we have a little bit of cushion in case there's a delay. But it arrives Thursday and then we'll take it up, with us to the show. So what I'm just putting out there is whether you're attending or not, if you have anything that you want to donate, we can certainly utilize it and we can certainly figure out a way to get it there if you're unable to bring it yourself. So please reach out to either one of us and, help us make this happen. I want to say, and maybe he doesn't want me to say it, but I'm going to. So Mickey's got a goal for us this year. And so last year, Zac was going to be thrilled if we did $2,000. That's what he was after. I was expecting 6 or 7, first year, smaller show. We did over 12,000. And I mean, that was fantastic. The community really stepped in and made this great. And we're not talking about a thinly sized group of people, throwing thousands of dollars around. No, it was, this smaller group at this auction and just really made it happen. Well, this year, Mickey wants to hit 30. He's 30. After 30,000. That's right. And right. And I think it's completely possible. We're going to have the room crowd to do it. Let's make sure we have the items to do it. Metazotics will certainly be donating as well, as is the vendors that I work with. I've already talked to them for it. So please, let's start the ball rolling on that and let's make some of that happen.
Damn. So, can I talk about one other thing?
You sure can.
Ticket prices online versus at the door.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this was a surprise to all of us.
All of it. We were all calling our pants down, guys. Yeah,
because typically, so Mickey does a show in this venue already, but this is one of the venues he doesn't sell the tickets online because this is, and you have to understand that different venues operate their ticket sales in different ways. This venue, they sell all the tickets through them. And so it's not they just open the door and you have to have somebody sitting there to take all your ticket money like, a lot of the smaller regional shows. That's not how it works at this one. So all the ticket sales have to go through them. So Mickey typically doesn't do this one online. However, we were getting bombarded with, why can't we purchase these tickets online? And so we pushed, towards Mickey. Hey, Mickey, we need to get this set so people can buy them online. So he got with the venue, got the link, set it up. And then the first day, maybe it was set up, we start getting hit with the ticket prices are what? And they're like, what? $65. It's what they were last year.
There was a WTF. Yeah. The ticket prices are what?
Mm-hmm. And it's because, what was it, like 90 something? Yeah. So the ticket prices for the entire weekend, if you were to pay at the door, are $65. And that covers the entire weekend for you. If you're only coming to Sunday, I think it's $10 for general admission.
$10 non-VIP, $15 VIP.
Right. And so, but Ticketmaster has a up yours charge.
Yes.
And it was like, it took the ticket prices to over $90.
Which was not our intention.
No, not at all. So what we are saying is just buy your tickets at the door and do not be afraid that tickets are going to sell out. It's not going to happen. And what we mean by that is if we reached the capacity for the space that we are renting, which that would thrill me. But if we reach the capacity, we are only currently taking up 1/3 of this massive event area. So we can easily grow and take up the next section, no problem. So you do not have to worry about, I'm flying out from across the country and I don't have my tickets to the event. It's nothing like that. You're going to be okay. We want to save some money because, listen, instead of you throwing $30 at Ticketmaster, that's another $30 for the auction. Okay? So we'd rather you spend it there. Yes, thanks for bringing that up, Zac.
Yeah, no. And growing pains, guys. We're new venue. So there's going to be little surprises. We all know that. That goes with the territory. So we're good to go. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to move on to the market?
Yeah, let's do that. And this is going to be the big one, guys. This is going to be graphs and all the fun stuff. So, as always, the market update is brought to us by the Show Me Reptile Show and Show Me Marketplace. You guys know what Mickey's doing. Mickey's making Colubridfest happen again for us, growing it big. So as always, support those that support us. And by us, I mean the Colubrid community. So let's go ahead and let's throw this bad boy up there. Let me get it up here for me too. So just as we expected, boom, we have had our uptick. It, started just a little bit after July, but moving straight into August, we are now hitting the season. And this is where the total number of animals are going to continue to climb in terms of what is listed. So ball pythons, there are currently, now this is interesting, and I'll talk about this at the end recap here. There are currently just over 30,000 ball pythons listed for sale. Last year at this same time, there were over 33,000, pushing 34,000 ball pythons for sale. And that's an interesting note for me. Now, total listings, we'll say 44,700 versus 46,700 last year. So you're seeing a 2,000 dip in overall animals and a 3,500 dip in ball pythons compared to the same time last year, but definitely a jump compared to last month. And so it's definitely an interesting trend. Colubrid listings, boom, 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 boom. You see where it all starts popping up again. And you've got, up here leading the pack, of course, hognose snakes. Hognose snakes are pushing, I'll have the exact numbers, but it looks like it's pushing somewhere around 2850 listed. Corn snakes coming in number 2 down here. But you can see almost all species in the colubrid range we have more listed today than what we had listed a month ago. Again, nothing extraordinary there. This is exactly what we expected to see because everything is hatching, is feeding, and this is the month that things start getting listed and put up for sale. There are a couple that went down, and we'll talk about those over here. But first, let's talk about the market share because this is, man, it keeps getting more and more interesting. So overall market share, ball pythons. For those who have been following this all along, we were pushing like 80% market share, BPs, when we first started tracking all this. And today, ball pythons are now at 67.5% of the market, of what's listed currently. And that is very interesting. And that's actually 2 points lower now than what it was, even with more being listed, than what it was a month ago. And that's because everything else has increased for sure. So you've got the other pythons, they had a market increase of 0.4%, with 398 more animals listed. Boas pretty much stayed flat at 11.3%, even with 485 more animals listed. But here's the big winner, colubrids. 1,332 more listed than what there was last month. And it took another 1.6% of the market share. It's currently at 15.6. And that's going to be the highest market share that it's had since we began tracking all of this.
Damn.
And I don't think that is a fluke by any stretch of the imagination. And I know there are going to be naysayers out there. There are going to be people who, they want to argue with the numbers because these don't show sales numbers. And you know what? Sales numbers are going to be hard for anyone to ever get their hands on because people keep those private. However, they want to say that this does is show an increase in how many are listed. It doesn't show an increase in market. This is a guy right here who sells snakes for a living. And I'm telling you right now, colubrids are moving. They have been moving. They continue to move. So that increase, what that is telling me, as someone who looks at these numbers in business constantly, That does not tell me that the colubrid market is slowing down in terms of what is being sold. That tells me that more and more people have been getting into colubrids over the past 4 to 5 years. And that's why you're now seeing more and more babies being produced, because the interest is there. And there's more and more people being intrigued. In fact, I personally know several ball python breeders who have begun to shift into the colubrid market and out of the ball python market. So that, to me, while others may want to see that as, oh, that's, we're reaching a saturation point. No, we're not. We're not anywhere close to a saturation point in the colubrid market as a whole. That is the colubrid market growing, and I am thrilled to be a part of that, and to be so entwined with it. Now let's talk about the colubrid market, share itself. And we already said hognose. You're sitting, 41%. That's still top dog. That's still taking up the biggest chunk. And then you got corn snakes, as always, at number 2, 24%. So those two combined right there are taking 2/3 of the colubrid market. And that's why I say the colubrid market is not anywhere near a saturation point when you only have 2 species out of how many, Zach? Mm-hmm. 2 species taking up 2/3 of what's listed. There's so much room. I mean, in fact, you look right here, and I've talked about these sleepers. You've got garter snakes are only taking up 1% of what's listed. House snakes, they don't even register a full percent yet. There's so few of them being sold. So I don't know about you, but I think April Inkfield's onto something. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I can speak to something. I just put up a picture. All I did, just a picture of those red-sideds, my single litter of red-sideds, and I've had several. I did nothing beyond that. Mm-hmm. And people are beating my door down for them. So,
yeah, and I think part of it is this information starting to get out there. The pictures are starting to get out there. The care, what they're not so scary just because they're tiny. That they get beautiful. They aren't as difficult as what people think. And I think that's really going to make some big headway. It's going to be a while before you see those market share percentages increase, because to your point, yours aren't ever going to hit morph market, Zach. They're never going to be listed. They're going to sell before they ever touch this graph. And that's why these are going to stay low for a while. And that's interesting to me. We pop and we look at the others. You've got king snakes in third place at 15%. But then you think about how many species are lumped into that category alone, right? Yeah. We've got bulls, pines, and gophers making 6%. And we know how hot those are right now. Rat snakes, that's another one. Think of all the species that are lumped into rat snakes. And it's only 6% of the market at the moment. Milk snakes are at 5%. All other colubrids at 2%. So again, very, very exciting stuff there. Now, here are my takeaways from the data as well as what I've been witnessing. So some current trends and patterns. Back to school, it slowed down for that 2 to 3 week period. And it usually, back to school will affect the market for about 2 weeks right before and then the first week of school, because you have everyone who went and had to do all the shopping for the shoes, the clothes, the whatever. And then it still affects you for the first week because it's like, oh crap, we forgot they need to get new glasses too. It's all the stuff they realized they didn't get those previous weeks. And that's also coming from a guy who was into optical for years. I know that first week is when that gets realized. So they go to the nurse, and the nurse sends a little note home that they need new glasses. So, but that is now it's lifting, and it started to lift this past weekend, and it was still going through the week. Started to lift this past weekend for most areas, and it has continued even today. I saw massive uplift. Messages are increasing. The questions are coming. And what I mean is, if you've got ads listed, if you have animals that are out there, be prepared. You're going to, here comes the what are they eating? How big are they? Can I have more pictures? You're going to get hit with questions. That's going to be part of the game right now. Just be ready for it and be polite.
Yeah, be polite.
So I said BPs, ball pythons are at 67.5% market share, the lowest we've seen. And so then my question becomes, did breeders finally take a year off? And what I'm saying is, yeah, we know that people have, sold whole collections, but guess what? That's a cycle that's happened over and over again. But this is the first time where I've actually seen fewer listed in the market. And every year you'll hear breeders, kind of stomping their feet after a bad show and saying, I don't know if I'm even going to breed anything this year, because they're still dealing with babies from last year. And this year, I personally do know some right here in my local area that did not breed any of their ball pythons because they still had babies from last year. And that low of a number compared to what was listed the same time last year suggests, I think there are a lot of them out there that actually did it. And that's probably going to be a good thing, for the market this year and possibly next year. So, pretty neat. Almost 1,500 more colubrids this August compared to last August. And like I said earlier, I don't take that. Well, that right there tells me that's not that because there's more animals just sitting there. That is, more animals are being produced this year than last year. And that again tells me this is a growing segment. Now, if I feel like I'm still sitting on so many babies at the end of this season, then maybe I'll change my tune, but I haven't felt that yet. So this is good stuff. Shows will now begin to really pop off. And it started last weekend. And the reason is because it could be a little more difficult for you to get into some of the more popular shows. So if there's shows you're wanting to do, I would suggest getting your vendor spot secured early, because when everyone has a bunch of babies hatching, they get real itchy. And so everybody's suddenly at the shows, and the show promoters are more likely to run out of space. So if you're doing show me shows, get online, get signed up. If you're doing other local shows, get in there. But the good thing is while yes, there's going to be a lot more vendors and a lot more babies, the buyers know that, and it brings more buyers out. So you have more people coming through the door, more people looking, more people excited. So the shows are going to be hopping. Bring your A game. Do all the things we've talked about before that make you successful at a reptile show. And if you haven't heard that, you should join our Patreon, because we have vending do's and vending don'ts on the Colubrid and Colubrid Radio Patreon. All right, so 30 and 60-day advice, not device. 30, 60-day advice. Stay on top of your messages. Sales happen quickly. Meaning, if you get a message about an ad or a listing, don't think, well, it's Saturday and I'm going to take Sunday off. I'll get back to them on Monday. There's a good chance somebody else is going to answer them before then, and that's the direction they're going to go. I'm not saying don't ever walk away from your email. We all need to do it a little more often, but I will say the quicker you can respond to a message, the more apt you are to close a transaction. House snakes and garters are hot. Maybe this is the year that you should pick some up. You may not be breeding either one of these yet. That's fine. But this is probably the time that more people should start getting into them, because they're going to be hot for a while. So this is kind of that early. If we were picking stocks here, I would tell you garters and house snakes are the stock to pick. Post adult pics on socials. I mentioned earlier the black rat snake piece. And, this goes along with a lot of others, because even if it's not a species that changes an incredible amount from baby to adult, having good adult pictures here and there on your socials will certainly increase the desire from individuals, because they know what this baby is going to look like. They already know it's going to be a yellow snake, but is it going to be a vivid yellow snake or a dull yellow snake? Well, look at those parents. They're both vivid. So that's, again, something that's going to help you right now is post-adult pics. Enhance your presence. We talked about that before. Continue to stay active, stay engaged on socials if possible. Make yourself known at the shows. Do the same shows regularly. People come to expect you to be there, and they know what you're going to be bringing, or at least the genre that you're going to be bringing. And just as I had said the last time, and I'm leaving these in the same color here, check listings and websites regularly as a buyer. If there's something you want, things are going to be coming up quickly. This is your chance to grab it. Check listings and websites regularly as a seller, because you're going to have a lot of things that you're needing to list. Make sure you're staying in the right price point. And so you're not pricing yourself too high or too low. Either way, keep yourself in the market, so to speak. All right, so that's what I have for the market update.
Okay. Who's the market update brought to us by?
Show me reptiles. I did it. I did it in the beginning. You must have forgot it.
I wasn't sure.
Oh, yeah, I did it.
We're covering each other.
That's right.
All right. So science update brought to us by Rare Genetics Inc. As always, get those sheds to them. We're happy with what they're doing to help us out. We have our code that will get you a discount. So do that as well. And today, for our science update, I'm back to journal articles. I'm sorry, our intro this time is going to go a little long because it just so happens that a very important paper is being done the same day that Clint had to do the entire month's worth of market update. So, but yeah, so the paper that I'm going to discuss today, the title of which many of you know it, some of you do not. It's titled Environmental Enrichment Increases Brain Volume in Snakes. And so here it is. This paper came out in the spring. I don't know the exact month, but it was spring. And when it hit, of all the recent peer-reviewed articles that tie back to herpiculture, and there's not tons, so whenever there's one, I get real excited because in my world, I love seeing what other people are doing. Usually I'll have one or two people message me. When this article hit, literally the day it hit, I had 20 plus messages. And the reason why is the primary author, I cannot say names. I am very sorry. Gokulan, coming out of Wilfrid Lawyer University in Waterloo, Canada. One of the authors on here, Morgan Skinner. I have talked to Morgan in person to work with my student whose name is Morgan. So that was a fun conversation. But Dr. Morgan and Morgan, we're actually doing a fun thing with false water cobras and altruism. And do they have friends? The garter snake paper we talked about before. This is the group, the lab group that this research kind of comes out of. And here's what I love about this paper. There's an awful lot of arm waving when it comes to the enriched versus non-enriched argument. There's this whole idea that like snakes need the enrichment, and need is a strong word. We're not even going to get into that because I have like 12 minutes and I could talk for 3 hours on the word need by itself. But there's this whole idea that like living in a non-enriched environment, it's not really causing any harm. Then we have to get into the definition of harm. What is harm? And our guest tonight could probably talk about that at great length. Mm-hmm. But with this particular paper, as a scientist, I like to see data where you have two populations and there is a difference between the populations. And when that difference is driven by a stimuli or an effect, then I go, okay, now we're working with something. And so when it comes to the whole enriched versus non-enriched argument, that's what the authors did. And they used a snake that's kind of near and dear to my heart. Hognose snakes, for crying out loud. So Nasicus was the study animal here. And basically what they did is relatively straightforward, and I kind of like the elegance, but they use some high-end technology that not everybody has access to. So if you're watching this on YouTube, sorry, there's highlights in here. But they use these terms, which are important. I zoomed and I probably shouldn't have, so we're going to zoom back out. If you look over here, we have enriched and standard. Standard equals tub, enriched equals vivarium, if you want to think about it that way. Now, their standard, I would argue, isn't necessarily your standard tub, because a lot of people today will put a substrate in there. And if I had a criticism of this paper, the simple act of adding aspen and pine to a hognose snake enclosure, we talked about this before. The snakes are going to burrow through that, and that's going to give them more stimuli than them living on a paper towel. And lots of people that are keeping these kind of animals in racks are putting them on a pine bedding. So I think that might have changed the results a little bit if they would have done that, but that's just my 2 cents on that. But basically what they did is they took 15 snakes, they broke them up, 8 and 7. And I think one of them ultimately perished early on. So, sample sizes are relatively equal. Sample sizes are relatively small. That's because I've heard a lot of people ripping them apart because of the sample sizes. Guys, there's this thing in academia called an eye cook. that you don't know about. That's the Institution for Animal Care and Use Committee. And I have to get my projects through the iCook. And so in a perfect world, you would do 30 and 30 hognose snakes to get normality for our stat nerds. But then the iCook grabs hold of it, as they should. Don't want to irritate my iCook. So anyway, and then they basically kind of have a debate and an ethics question like, well, do we really need to do this with that many animals if there is take? And take is the killing of the snakes in the name of science. And so I am, as a scientist reading this paper, I feel like there was an iCook effect, which we don't talk about, which is part of the reason why the sample sizes were what they were. Okay? I could be dead wrong, but I just feel like that's that. So, and they tried to do the stats with very small sample sizes, but they basically took equal amounts of hognose snakes and then had them in these trials for an extended period of time. They lived on the unenriched tubs. They lived in the enriched vivariums. And then after a certain period of time, they sacrificed the snakes. They did kill the snakes. And then what they did is they used MRIs to quite literally measure their brains. And as a scientist, I love that because you can't debate a volume. You can't debate a mass. You can debate how you got to that mass, but the mass is the mass is the mass. And by using an MRI, same thing we use on you, if you go to the, for medical purposes, you can basically calculate volumes. And by calculating the shape and the volume, you can then get this is bigger, this is smaller, this is equal, blah, blah, blah. And you can kind of see that in this graph. Now, I don't want to get into graphs because this is supposed to be fun, but I do want to show you what they kind of hone in on, and this is important. So we're going to zip down to this part of the imagery. This is a hognose snake's brain. And
I figured as much. I took one look at those pictures and I thought, hognose brain.
Yep, there you go. You're on it. So which part's the posterior lobe?
The one up there. It's...
Well played. So I believe the green part is the posterior lobe. And in the posterior lobe of your brain, this is where things like the cerebellum are. This is where the part of the brain is that is basically used for kind of computing the environment. This is the part of the brain that is going to be responding to the chemoreception of the tongue, which is, we know, very important in snakes. And so there's this idea, if you use it, you lose it. If you don't use it, you lose it. And so what they basically hypothesized was, if the enriched environment is having an effect, and if the non-enriched environment is having a deleterious effect, then we should be able to look at the posterior lobe of the brain, and we would expect it to be larger in the enriched side and smaller in the non-enriched side. Now, listeners, we live in a world where we put up facts, and then the greater populace goes, yeah, no.
I'm going to do my own research.
These are numbers. This is non-negotiable. Okay? That's what I want you to get out of what I'm going to say. I could go either way. All criticisms aside, if we zip down to the blue line, wherever the blue line is, here it is. In summary, enrichment tended to increase the brain volume of snakes, especially in posterior regions of the brain. It's a one-liner. There it is. And if we go up here, for those of you who like statistics, here is the statistics. I highlighted it for you. Larger snakes had larger brain volumes. That's to be expected. And snakes in enriched housing condition had larger brains than controls. And then the most important thing is we have a p-value of 0.03. Now that has a 9 behind it, so 0.04. That is statistically significant. So what does this tell me? This is telling me as a scientist, if you enrich the snake's habitat for these hognose snakes, they have more to interact with. They have more chemical cues. They have more physical things to move around on. They have more things in their environment that they have to figure out how to navigate. That's going to lead to more neural activity, which is going to lead to more brain activity, which is going to lead to a bigger brain. And you don't get a bigger brain unless you're stimulated. So there you go. There it is. And that's why a lot of people read this paper and they're like, woohoo, mic drop, we're done. Well, I'm also going to come back with, we're not done. We're only just beginning. That's the way I think we need to look at this paper, because this is one study of 15 snakes. Now, there are other snake species where we could get a completely different result. We could, if you did that, I read this paper and was like, what the hell would happen with a garter versus a crebo versus a blood python versus a rattlesnake? That's what my brain did. My brain did not say, we're done, like I just presented it, by the way. I did it on purpose. Okay? So, wonderful paper. What are my takeaways? Since Clint did his takeaway slide, and I don't have a slide, I just have green and yellow lines on the screen. My takeaways are very similar to the takeaways that the authors had, which are right over here. Okay? And so basically, what they found was that exposure to physical environmental enrichment during the first year of life significantly increased total brain volume, particularly in the posterior brain regions, which is telling me that if you enrich your snakes, you're probably doing good. Now, what the hell is good? I don't know. So let's look at this a different way. If you enrich your snakes, their brains will likely benefit from it. That's the better way of saying this as far as I'm concerned. And then, in undisturbed natural environments are likely to be more complex, challenging than captive conditions, and maybe we're accurate to state that standard reptile housing conditions stunt brain growth and have negative effects on cognition and welfare. That's a very strong statement. I will say that that statement might be even a little too strong for me, but at the same time, I don't know if I have a problem with it. So we've got this building volume of research out there that's looking at the impact of how we house these animals and what we should be doing. And the thing is, as the data comes in and the publications come out and the peer review goes through and these things are now available to us, there is a trend that points towards, if you give it, they will use it. And they appear now to possibly, or definitely, depending on how you interpret this data, benefit from it. So I do not think this is a lot. I know a couple people, I read posts and everything, and it was kind of like, we're done. The argument's over. The argument's not over. This is but a data point in a growing sea of data points. But it's a data point that does kind of show that environmental enrichment is probably having a good benefit. So for the 20 plus people that asked for this paper, here it is. I do want to let you know the authors of this paper did an episode with Liam on reptiles and research, and it's like a 2.5 hour discussion of this paper. If you want more, go there and either watch that on YouTube or listen to that episode with your podcast player, because it's good. I listened to it on an airplane going to Phoenix, and then spent the week in California. I actually listened to it while I was going out for the Colubridfest field trip. And then I thought, you know what? I need to know more about this. And I listened to it again. So it's that good. So anyway, there you go. All right. So that's the science update for this week.
That's good stuff. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think in my mind, the argument has always been they don't need it. You know what I mean? I think that's typically it. But it's almost like what we've always said with UVB, where even before the science hits showing the benefits, it's like, how could it not benefit? You know what I mean? It just, common sense to me just suggests that it absolutely would benefit. You know,
it's interesting you brought up UVB, because I actually feel you can do with colubrid. I know you can actually screw up the UVB with colubrids, because I have 2 blinded snakes. Yep. But I don't really think you can screw up the enrichment with colubrids. I think if you put it in there, they're going to use it, or they're not going to use it. But at least they're going to have to think, I got to get up over this stump today, which is more brain matter and more neural activity than just sitting there thinking, I water bowl. Water bowl. I poop in that corner. Then I go sit in that corner, and my water bowl's in that corner. So,
yeah, I agree.
I'm excited to see more papers like this coming in. So
and I'm excited to see exactly what you mentioned. How does this lay out across various species?
yes,
Because like when you just said an indigo or a crebo, one of the two,
yeah.
and a blood python, I would be highly interested to see how it affects each one of those, because you're talking about a very active,
Mhm.
predaceous, hunting, on the move species versus one that does nothing, that is
Well,
a
the thing
sit
that
and wait.
so I think the sit and wait ones are more interesting because there's this perception of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're an ambush predator, you have to be, I mean, on point. A lot of us are deer hunters, and the deer hunter that's on point gets a hell of a lot more deer than the Zac Loughman deer hunters of the world that falls asleep every freaking time he goes hunting.
Well, but
So,
at the,
if you're on point, but at the same time, if you fall asleep, you're just blend into the background, and then the next thing you know, if you the prey shows up. So no, the ambush predators or ambush species are the ones that I would love to see.
well, see, and where my thought process on this is, to your point, an ambush predator has to be more alert, right? Okay, but that means their baseline would already start higher.
Yes,
So the
exactly.
enrichment, they're not really interacting with it as much, though. It's like in your analogy as a deer hunter, that's like they're just being more trees.
Mm-hmm.
It does, you know what I mean? It's not making you have to. You're not doing a whole lot of things differently. You're still just sitting, listening, and watching. And so that's what I think I'd be interested in is seeing what the actual increase is with the extra
Sure.
enrichment around by something that's not being moved. Even though I agree with you that their thought process, that the base is probably already at a higher level than the
Yep.
base of some of the
But
others.
to a blood python, having one horizontal object in your tub gives you a potential hide or object for you to set up your ambush position from. And that might actually calm you down and make you feel less stressed
Mm-hmm.
than living in an environment where you don't have a hide to set up your ambush from. And you spend your entire life sitting there thinking, oh God, I'm not going to kill anything because I don't have a place to set up the right ambush. Like, so
Everything can see me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, this is interesting stuff. I mean, I think we're all going to look forward to seeing what comes out,
Yes.
as this continues to go forward. So.
All right. Well, we definitely need to bring our guest on. It's really funny because we were talking with our guest, who we'll introduce here shortly, about how we keep it to 45 minutes, and I'm looking at the timer and we're 10 minutes over.
Yeah.
So there's that. Anyway, we just did too much. There's too many good things to talk about. Okay. So our guest tonight, we're excited because he's a friend of both of ours. And we've had time to interact with our guest at IHS in person, at Tinley in person. So bring him to the stage. We have the one, the only, Dr. Billy Sveen. I hope I said that correctly. Did I?
Really close. It's Sven, but it looks like Sveen. So I don't correct anyone unless they ask. So you brought that on yourself.
Wow, we do that. We are very alike, my friend, because I have been Loughman, and it's so I don't really care.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
I'm pretty proud that the PhD got it wrong because I had it right. So I'm like,
right, yeah, you did. Okay.
Finally, I've got one.
But anyway, we're very happy to have Dr. Billy, as we will forever know him, because Dr. Billy doesn't keep any colubrids, which might make you ask, why the hell is he on Colubrid and Colubrid Radio? Well, what Dr. Billy does is he thinks a lot about herpiculture and why we do what we do, mm-hmm. and what should our ethical standards be. And basically, I love talking to Billy because he makes me think about why the hell I keep things in boxes. And he has, mm-hmm. You may not know it, but he has definitely uplifted my keeping. I find myself standing in the garage by myself thinking about Billy's talk at IHS. And so we saw him, Clint and I both, at the Knoxville IHS in 2024. And then in the Advancing Herpiculture session, I asked him to come, and he did, thank God. And then I invited him again because he did such a great job that I thought more people needed to see him. So he was part of our session this past summer. And we knew we were going to have him on, and he's got a busy schedule. We've got a busy schedule. And so he's finally here. So welcome to the show, Billy.
Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate the invitation to the show and to IHS. It really has been. Also, I think, a life-changing event for me in my trajectory of my career and how I see myself interacting with herpiculture as a community.
Yeah, totally. So, with that being said, how did the herp? Well, first of all, tell everybody what you do now, and then we'll go to the intro.
Sure. So I am a pediatric ICU doctor. So I did, after undergraduate, I went to medical school for 4 years, and I did 3 years to become a pediatrician. And then I did 3 more years to only work in a pediatric ICU. So the kids that are too sick that need to be admitted to the hospital and are too sick to be on like a regular floor, they come to the ICU. So these are kids that, have been in car accidents, burns, they have really bad pneumonia, need to be on a breathing machine, all of that kind of stuff. After big heart surgeries, brain surgeries, they come to the ICU to recover. That's what I do. Along with that, I am a medical ethicist, or like a bioethicist is like the bigger term for that. So I did a master's in ethics while I did my medical degree. And with that focus, I study how people make decisions in the ICU setting for children, which is a lot of making decisions on the behalf of someone else. And in diving more into herpiculture and hearing the way people talk about the way we're making decisions in the best interest of our animals, started to sound a lot like the way we describe how people make decisions in the best interests of their children. And I thought maybe there's some things about the professional skills and technical skills I've learned in ethics from the medical human side that I can bring into reptiles and exotic pet keeping. And so that is what I'm doing now.
Okay. So with that being said, which is a lot.
Yeah.
By the way, I need you to talk to my graduate students who are like, I can't work on this master's degree. I've got too much. And you just decided to do one while you were in medical school.
It might have been hard at times. And there also were times where I found the quickest way to get assignments done, like when I was on certain rotations. And so, there was some strategic class taking. But it was a lot of work, but it was some of the best times.
Yeah. Well, that's impressive. So with that being said, when and where and why and what do reptiles, how do they fit into that? Have they,
like jump in recently or go back?
Just go back to the beginning like we always do on our show and talk about how they got to here.
I think I got a picture right here, actually. I'm usually not on the camera for this, so I got my little bearded dragon.
There you go.
That I got for my 11th birthday. So I was always interested, just like everyone else, more dragons than dinosaurs. So hopefully it doesn't offend anyone. But I was always pumped about finding frogs and snakes up in my aunt's lake cabin in Minnesota. Toads, gray tree frogs, all of those things were just some of my favorite stuff. And then got that bearded dragon for my 11th birthday. Then by middle school, I was breeding pictus geckos, had a fat tail gecko, had a leopard gecko and such. Had to get rid of most of those, except for the bearded dragon. My mom kept my bearded dragon for 4 years, and then we were reunited in medical school.
Nice.
And then when he died around age 14, I was just entering residency. And I was like, I don't really have time to go to the pet store all the time to get crickets. And so let's do a snake for the first time ever. And so I got a ball python because that seemed easy and straightforward. And I essentially put it in a single rack system, like just one python in one sweater box, essentially. And because that's what I saw people doing. This was like, when would this have been? I don't know, like 12 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, something like that. So that's what I saw a lot of people doing, having big rack systems. And then that was my only snake throughout the rest of my medical training as we moved around until we bought this house in 2021. I was expanding and had this room to kind of do what I wanted. So then I jumped into a lot of poison frogs, smaller geckos, and then working on building all of my own enclosures and hopefully building out some bigger enclosures after building more of a friendship with Roy Arthur Blodgett.
Yep.
Trying to work on some more mixed species environments too, if all things go according to plan. Just starting to dip my toes into that. So yeah, that's kind of where I was in like probably 2021, 2022, making friends with Roy and Dylan and Phil. So that's like the Animals at Home Network people, bouncing ideas around with them, and really started. It's funny, like I think my first podcast I ever did was on Project Herpiculture with Roy, and I felt very insecure about it because I was like, we're just new friends. We're not like, I don't do anything that interesting. He's like, no, the way you think about this is unique.
Yes.
People will want to hear this. And I didn't say anything about being an ethicist, didn't say anything about being a doctor. I really didn't want that as part of it. Right. It was just like, I've thought about this a little bit. And after being with you and Roy, IHS, and being invited to do that, really seeing how well it was received. And then also at my work, people saying, this is really interesting that you're doing this. This counts toward like your academic work. That gave me the green light to jump in. Yeah. And so now I still do the vast majority of the academic work I do is still clinical research, but I have a solid side hustle of reptile ethics that I like to say. But also another interesting thing that's come up as I start talking to the veterinary school is talking to the vet school about the ethics of and decision making of dogs and cats. So that's like another little thing that's kind of come out of this too, because a lot of the same decision frameworks. So yeah, it's been a journey. It's been a lot of fun. I'm constantly tinkering around, slowly expanding things. If I'm looking to the side, it's because like there's frogs over here, there's scorpions over there. It's kind of a wild little office.
Yeah, very cool.
I tell you, with the path that you've taken and the two talks that, we've had the privilege of being able to sit and listen to, I think there are very few people out there, let alone that I have interacted with, that would have the background and really the wherewithal to approach these topics the way that you have. When we talk about these different ethics and these different pieces, because what I've loved is hearing you come through, and you obviously, you have your opinions on it, like anybody, on these topics do, but you approach it in such a non-judgmental way and share these things in such a way that it really encourages listening and thought rather than defense, if that makes sense. And so, I tell you that, so my introduction to Billy was, as you said, in 2024 at Knoxville. Now, I'll tell you, while I certainly can put on the boom, okay, we're on, all right, we're at a show, you're on, and I'll do the high energy, engaging. But when it comes to like small talk, somewhere, I am horrible at that. I want to be surrounded by a group of people I know. And as long as I have like those, 2 or 3 people I know around me, I'm the loudest guy in the room. But if you don't have me surrounded with a few people I know, I'd rather sit back, not say a word, and just kind of melt if I can. So, but we go, and the only person I knew at that IHS was Zac. And Zac was busy. And so I'm like, great. You know, I mean, what do I do now? Right. And instantly that's the first time I met Billy. I met Roy, Chris Montross, and Nicholas Vine. And the four of us went out to dinner. And that was such an awesome time for me. I mean, I think that's probably what started to set the tone for me for what IHS is and helped what Colubridfest has become, was because I started to feel that community again. And, forgive me if I'm speaking, just for myself here, Billy, but I feel like Billy and I hit it off right away. We had some great conversation. And, and again, you're talking about two guys from very different, paths here.
Yeah.
But it was very, very interesting. And even the things we kept didn't cross, but it was such a great talk. It was a great time with really everybody there. And I said four, there's five of us, that I remember calling home that night and was like, I went to dinner with four guys I've never met. And I had a freaking blast. I mean, it was so great. So in the talk that you gave that day is that's going to be pretty much the premise of this show for everyone listening is, that's what we're going to be talking about. I enjoyed it so much, and the thought behind it, because to me, while I like learning things, I like getting facts and getting more knowledge. What really tickles me is when you make me think in a different way, because then it's influence is what it is. When you've caused someone to think bigger and think more about what they do, the things that are going on around them, that's what your talk did. So much so that I reached out to Billy and I asked for pieces of his presentation. And, I know that there's some things that Billy was doing with it that, didn't want it out in the public yet, which, that was great. But I appreciate the fact that Billy sent me a couple slides, one in particular that I really wanted, because I wanted to bring it back here and discuss it with my team, because it really had that much of an impact on me and my thought process, and really how we engage even with our customers about this very topic. So Billy, I just want you to know what you're about to talk about today. But what you talked about then, it was incredibly impactful, and that entire trip, meant quite a bit to me. So
yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I remember that dinner very well. I remember because I had met Roy earlier that day after talking to him online and by phone for a couple of years, I don't know. And I was like, you're the only person I kind of sort of know, so I'm just going to go with you everywhere. And then ended up at this dinner, and there was a lunch before that too, where I didn't know anyone other than kind of sort of Roy. And no, it was just like a wonderful weekend. And then I was nervous about, not like to give my presentation, because I do a fair amount of teaching and talks, but I was nervous about what will people think of this. This is pretty different than the rest of the talks. And the way it was received by you and Zach and everyone else there. Like, I remember shortly after my talk, we were riding on the bus to the zoo, and I was looking around like, who am I going to sit by for this bus ride? I don't even know how long this bus ride is. And Zach just looks at me, you're sitting by me. We're going to talk about this. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess.
I'm a little direct.
Then it went fast then. It was a quick bus ride. But that all of that gave me the confidence of, okay, I'm gonna think more seriously about this. And I think it's funny what you say about how I come at a subjective topic with some level of objectivity and technicality of precision of language. It's a thing people make fun of ethicists for, especially in the clinical world, because they'll come to me with a very challenging problem. I'll write a couple page summary, and at the end I'll lay out what's acceptable, not acceptable, and they'll look at me and be like, so what do I do? I was like, well, you still get to pick. So yeah, I can help frame the discussion, but I won't solve your problems.
Yeah.
Well, Billy,
right.
do you want to? Because I think it's funny because normally Zach or I introduce the topic, but I think you're probably going to be able to say this better than either one of us really
Ding,
could.
Sure.
ding.
So, would you like to share what the topic of tonight's episode is?
And before we go any further, if you're listening in a car, you can still listen. But we very rarely, very, very, very rarely have said, go to YouTube and watch this. But we're probably going to say this may be one after you listen driving, you might want to go hit it up on YouTube. So,
And I'll try to make the slides not just like you're looking at slides.
Sure.
Hopefully it'll be mostly conversational, but yeah, I mean, the slides will help.
And I just need to say, this segment is brought to you by Reptile. we see, Zach, you got on to me earlier,
Yeah.
but we both dropped the ball now. Guest segment is always brought to you by Reptile. Reptile makes a great product. We use it here. Zach uses it there. I just got an entire pallet of various Reptile product in because why? We have an anniversary event coming up, and I needed to load up 2 shops with it. So please check out Reptile and support them. All right, Billy, let's roll, buddy.
Take her away.
All right. Oh, nice. Very good. Okay. So we talked about this a little bit, that I'm a pediatric ICU doctor and that I am also a clinical bioethicist. But now I'm pivoting and adding to it, not taking away from the other things I was already doing, but now adding some animal welfare and animal ethics work. So this is a paper that I had essentially written when I presented at IHS, and then from IHS 24 to IHS 25, this paper has been published. So if anyone wants to read more about the things that we're going to be talking about, there is some more detail in there on some things, and the technical academic language, some of which we'll try to avoid. But this is on captive and field herpetology. If you go to their website, it's free and open access. It's not, I believe how they're going to do is like put a whole year's worth of articles together at the end of the year in a collected edition. So right now it's just like a separate article. So if you scroll down to the bottom for articles, there's been a couple published since it. So it's like a few down.
Cool.
But as much as we talked about avoiding a lot of jargon, there's some terminology I think is useful to think through. So the idea of utilitarianism is broadly that consequences matter and that something is considered good if the results of the results of the action cause more good than they cause harm. And there's a whole bunch of ways to frame it. And the gross oversimplification of utilitarianism is that you could do something horrible to one person to help 10 other people, and then that's good, and then people really dislike that gross way of living in the world. There's a whole bunch of very nuanced ways to think about utilitarianism, like blinded rule-based utilitarianism, where you don't know where you would be in that situation, and so you would never act that way because you wouldn't want to be abused in that way, right? So it's a form of consequentialism, which is to say that the consequences matter. It's not necessarily about your virtue. It's not necessarily about how hard you tried or your intent. It's about what happened. What were the results? What was the impact of what you did? And to that extent, your intent matters, but it matters because that's likely to affect your future consequences. But a lot of animal welfare and animal ethics comes out of this vein, especially the earlier stuff with Peter Singer, which who I'm a fan of, and a lot of this work is based off of. So what we're going to be looking at is not like how does it make you feel, but what are the results of it? And so that brings into a distinction between animal welfare and animal rights. So animal welfare is what is the well-being of the animal? How much does the animal suffer in this current environment situation? Whereas animal rights is this animal a person? What obligations do I have to this animal? Does this animal have the right to not be confined or in captivity? Am I echoing?
No, this is me. You're good.
No, okay. So to draw a distinction there, and so often within herpiculture, we demonize animal rights, and then we don't really distinguish between animal rights and animal welfare. I would suggest that everyone that's taking this seriously should be very keyed into animal welfare, exactly like the article that you presented earlier, Zach. Like that's exactly the type of stuff that we need to look at. Animal rights doesn't necessarily say what you should be doing with it, because it depends on how you view animal rights in general. And so we often say, when we talk about animal rights, we're talking about a fairly left, more radical version of animal rights, but it doesn't need to be that way. And as we'll talk about, I have a version of animal rights that I think is very in line with good animal welfare and being able to keep animals for our enjoyment. Speciesism. So this is the idea that it's usually pro-human speciesism. So we privilege ourselves over everyone else. And so this topic is going to be a bit what we would call like anti-speciesist. So I'm not going to say that like my ball python is better than a rat. I'm going to say, how do I evaluate the welfare of a ball python? How do I evaluate the welfare of a rat? What principles can I make so that I can evaluate them both by the same principles? Then I might come up with different results, but it's not because I like the ball python more than the rat. It's because there's something intrinsically different that is to be a ball python than it is to be a rat. And so this becomes really important, because then you can't just say, I'm going to do this because I'm in charge and I'm a human. Like that argument falls away. And that's what a lot of people say about a lot of things, especially when it comes to how you're interacting with animals or interacting with the environment. So that argument falls away. But then you also can't say things like, I don't like these animals, or I don't like these animals as much, or these animals are kind of stupid, or like, insert adjectives here, or these animals are so magnificent, we need to put them up on a pedestal. Instead, you have to have some type of a rubric on which to evaluate them. And so what I was trying to do in this paper, and I think I did something. I did a start to it. I started the conversation, is try to make that rubric. So within pediatric care, the idea of denying a child recommended care, we evaluate with on this spectrum of what's like ideal for the patient, what is like strongly recommended that the family do, what's strongly recommended that they don't do, what are we going to call child protection for if they do, right? And so to think about that, we think about this idea of a best interest standard, and that's usually what we shoot for. It's a really nice thing to say out loud, but it's almost impossible to define, right? I would argue it's impossible to define, right? So if you have one child, should you be prioritizing their school? Should you be prioritizing their nutrition? Should you be prioritizing their sleep? How about their social interactions? How about sports? If they're like sports, which sport? Like there's all kinds of things. Then let alone if you have 2 children, which one do you prioritize over which one? What about if doing something for what about doing something for the children impacts yourself? How does that, so there's so many issues with how you even define what best standard is. Then there's the idea that you can't ever do it. Say we all agreed what the best interest standard for a child was. One more, reading one more book would be potentially better, right? Sleeping 30 more minutes would be better. Having a more nutritious meal would be better. You could always do it a little bit better, no matter how you define it. So that's why I put an arrow on there, right? This goes off the screen. You can't ever get to the best interest standard, let alone can't define it, can't do it. So
that was one of my favorite concepts.
I know
of everything you did when we had this discussion. That right there was one of my absolute favorite pieces of all of this. Is that it's the best standard is unachievable. Right, is basically the sum that up, and I thought that was
undefinable,
fantastic.
unachievable.
Yeah.
So what we often do is try to figure out what the bottom line is. What's in pediatrics we call the harm principle. So if we recommend a family does something and they say no, how do I know that's within this zone of parental discretion, or the parents have the right to choose, versus I should file a report to Child Protective Services, or potentially just in my job when I'm in the ICU, override their decision and do it anyway, and essentially call a judge. And so the harm principle for pediatrics is essentially immediate threat to life or limb with like long-term implications, essentially. And people argue of whether that's the right place to put it. And it's not really the same principle that you use for like everyday decisions for children, but a lot of that has bled into it, right? So like it's clearly not in the child's best interest to be exposed to their parents smoking, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't call CPS if the parent is smoking around the child, because the harm to take the child away is so much worse. And so it does not fall to the level of abuse or neglect. And so that's a useful principle for us to define. So I started thinking about what would be somewhat of a principle that I could apply across multiple species with very different ways of living in the world, very different natural histories. And so what I came up with was this idea of a minimal welfare standard. So where, this best interest standard that we can't define, right? So you could always add one new plant, one new thing to enrich the environment. You could always make it 1 square foot bigger. You could always add one more one more aspect to the gradient of the heat or the light or the UV spectrum, right? You could always do something a little bit better. So what's the minimum? And that's a phrase we commonly hear, especially if you're spending time on Facebook, for example, in the message groups, but all over the internet. If you go back to, I remember being on King Snake and Geckos Unlimited and Dendra Board and such. How many frogs can I fit in this 10-gallon? And it's like, well, it's like a couple thousand. They're just not going to live. They're just going to get really squished. But all jokes aside, often people think about the minimum as a cage, right? Like how big of an enclosure. But I want to take a step back and say, what's the minimum overall? Like, how can you assess overall the minimum? And then in between that minimum and this unachievable, undefinable best, if you're anywhere in there, now you're doing a reasonable job. So what I said, yeah, you're going to say something.
Can you go back to that real quick? So, because I'd like to share this slide right here is the one that I asked for. This is the one that I reached out to Billy and wanted to be able to talk, here at the shop about. And if you're okay with it, I'd like to explain how I translated this to what we do here.
Yeah.
Not how we care for our animals here, but instead how we communicate with the public.
Yeah, here. I love that. Oh, that's what makes me so excited when you asked for it. I was like, oh yeah, have it right away.
Well, and it was one of the things that I had to. So a great thing about the team that we have here is they really, really care about what they're doing. They really, really care about the animals. They take great pride in making, we use the best stuff. We want to recommend the best stuff. We want to make sure all animals get the best of anything that they can. And it became this conversation where sometimes, because of that enthusiasm and that wanting to make sure that animal has the absolute best, we're talking to customers who they may have gotten this animal from someone that didn't explain everything out in the beginning, and now they're going to walk out of here feeling beat up because they can't afford the Cadillacs, And so for me, what
and
this
they don't
gave
have time
me
to read 8 books about how the sun works and how all of the different vitamins are metabolized and which ones are stored by the liver.
Yes, it's every bit of it. And so what this was for me was it was an opportunity for us to look at, okay, this minimal welfare standard, to your point, it's explaining to my group that we have to ensure we get past that. And that's not because and before anyone thinks that, oh, well, we just want to make sure they have the bare minimum. No, in business here, guess what? The closer we get to the best interest standard, that means the more money somebody's spending to make that happen. So obviously,
sure.
from a business standpoint, that's what we want. But that's not always the best for the animal if that was all we were describing and saying that basically if you don't get that, you're doing horrible. And these people leave and don't even get the right things to hit that minimal welfare standard. And so that was kind of how we approached it and how I wanted my people to understand that through educating the public on their new animal or the animal they're getting, as long as we get past that minimal welfare standard, we're never going to hit that best. And that was another great point that, I got to share with them, that we'll never, because even if you like, the best is them going to be in nature. Yeah. Well, even better than that is that plot in nature they're in is if we went and killed all the predators that would eat them.
Yeah.
Then we made it even better.
Yeah, I hate that argument.
Yes.
Doesn't sit well with me.
Exactly. So that's where then the explanation was, we get them past that line. We make sure they're past that line. And over time, they continue to creep to the right because in 2 more weeks, they get another paycheck and they buy another $15 piece of decor for enrichment. Mm-hmm. Or, in a month, they're able to get that linear UVB instead of the compact bulb. And you know what I mean? It's those little steps towards that direction. And so it came to me of not just how we keep, but how we treat others that keep.
Yeah. How we communicate with each other,
exactly,
and how we have a shared language and understanding what we're even talking about, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're getting mad at someone who has a 10-gallon difference of what you think is the minimum standard, like why aren't we talking about acreage instead of gallons?
Mm-hmm.
Best interest standard is way off the chart. You need your own preserve for your leopard gecko. And you need to make sure it has all of the ability to go wherever it is. You need to have like a little microbot drone is the only way you can find it and see it. And there's no predators in there. All it gets to do is run around and eat stuff. It's completely unachievable, right?
Right.
So, I don't think we should shoot for the minimum, but I think we should be able to define the minimum so that we can get well above it.
Yep.
And then make some progress. Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what I am throwing out as the minimum, the rest will be describing this, is what I'm calling captive equivalence. So captive conditions where the animal is likely to experience less suffering than the animal would be expected to suffer in their natural wild habitat. So this is that consequentialist utilitarian view, right? So we'll walk through that here. So I don't need to spend a lot of time on this with you all, that reptiles and amphibians have the ability to suffer. Sometimes people need to be talked through some of the neurobiology of that, but we're going to skip all that because I think everyone here agrees that it's possible for these animals to feel pain and that it's something like it to be stressed and suffering for them. And then if something can suffer, avoiding unnecessary suffering is good. So in the paper, I talk about how you shouldn't swerve out of your way to hit a snake, right? That would be bad. But if you're having to make a decision that might cause suffering in another direction, right? What if you have to dangerously swerve and now you might put your own life in danger? And what if the only other option is to actually hit an unhelmeted motorcyclist coming directly at you in a head-on collision, right? Then I would argue you should absolutely hit the snake because not because I'm speciesist and I think that the human's more important than the snake. The human's ability to suffer is so much outweighed by the snake's ability to suffer. Some suffering, however, is inescapable. And so, part of this, the issues in this is the having predatory pets. But even in the wild environment, there's a lot of suffering. Even in our quite domesticated, everyday human American lives, there is suffering that's inescapable. You know, we are stressed about things. We have even things that we think of as pleasurable, like competitive sports, involve a fair amount of suffering that we see as having some type of a purpose to it, right? And so wild herps are considered to have worthwhile lives despite their suffering in their native environments. And we, you know, some people could say it's worthwhile because they're contributing to their ecology and to that environment, right? They have a role. Maybe it's not the individual, maybe it's the population. However, I would argue that the general concept most people have is that that individual animal itself is living a worthwhile life in the wild. But yet we know it has all kinds of stresses on it. You look at this, you're looking at this crested gecko that is thinner than we think of as most crested geckos. I'm not saying it's unhealthy. I'm just saying that thing's fighting for its food. And it's lost its tail, right? And that's almost all crested geckos that you would find in their native habitat have lost their tail from stress. So therefore, a captive reptile or amphibian experiencing less suffering than a similar wild animal would be experiencing is having a worthwhile life. And if they're having a worthwhile life, they're at or above that minimum welfare standard. That's the argument. So this is kind of like a classic deductive argument. I really don't think it, in order to attack the end, you have to attack 1 through 4 in order to attack 5 would be what I would strongly say.
So with this being in mind, can you go back to the crested gecko for a second?
Sure thing.
All right. So here's a common thread in herpetoculture today that I see as an ecologist. So, you know, I've now got my biologist cap on, right? So there's this whole thing like body condition indices. So what constitutes a healthy animal in nature versus human care? And I think a lot of times we look at our perceived pudgy anything and basically go like, well, I'm looking at this crested gecko in Isle of Pines, New Caledonia, and then I've got crested geckos literally right there. I can tell you right now that mine they're a bigger, badder body condition. A lot of people, I feel, see that picture and they make that the gold standard because that's in nature,
right?
But
I see, and I think it's useful to even think about humans. Oh yeah, you keep going.
Oh, but that animal is probably in a perpetual calorie deficit because it's got to run around every freaking night and hopefully find the fermenting fruit in the dry season when there are no fruits. And it was probably pudgier at one point in the 12-month calendar year because it had to be, or it wouldn't be here today. And so I'm not saying like we should make our animals obese. I'm not saying that. But there's this idea that I see a lot in private herpetoculture and in some zoo settings, to be honest, where we kind of go to nature to set this gold standard. And I feel like what we're actually doing, if that's the standard, not all the time, this is just an example to kind of promote the idea here and make people think a little bit, is that animal might actually be in that harm window out in nature.
Maybe.
You know, or I don't think it's near death. That is.
No,
I think it's
that's a skinny one.
Yeah, I think it's near that minimal deficit. It might be a little bit to the left of that line. So I think that we oftentimes we romanticize nature, without understanding nature. Because I've seen snakes that I caught in the wild, and I respected them highly that they were surviving with a giant hole that went right into their stomach. And we could literally see the fecal mass, like the mouse or frog or whatever being digested. And I'm just sitting there like, I don't want to live with that. But I also didn't kill the snake because it was surviving. But I have thought in retrospect, was that the right thing to do? I think that was the right thing to do. But so anyway, so there's
I think even
sizing of nature. I think is something where this comes into play a lot.
I think as humans, we absolutely over romanticize nature. I mean, if you think about it, I think all three of us we like to camp. Am I right in that all three of us are those kind of nature guys, right?
I like to hike.
Okay,
Yes,
fair
I
enough.
like to sleep with a real roof.
Well, but even those of us that like to camp, it's like, we say things, hunters, we get out there and we feel great being out in nature, right? It gets us away from everything. But it's also, we enjoy camping because we brought food with us.
Yeah.
We brought drinks with us. We brought clothing and our shelters that we put up, and
Yep.
it's our protection. But it's how many of us have been on Naked and Afraid? You know what I mean? It's a different story when it's something like that.
Right.
So yeah, we enjoy nature, but we enjoy nature when we have all of the protections that society has built for us at the same
Well, I think
time.
even looking at indigenous people that are still living in fairly indigenous ways, right? Like, so you have to go to fairly remote areas in South America and Southeast Asia and parts of Africa to see these types of tribes still living this way. But there's good documentation of it if you want to look it up online. Their body habitus is very different than what we would consider a healthy American, right? There are no bodybuilders. There's not even someone that really looks like a marathon runner in that group. They are often, they can vary quite a bit within a tribe and between tribes, but they're all quite thin. And especially at some times of the year, as you say. And we know based on good medical evidence that if we have their child supplemented with some different types of nutrition early on, almost all could grow taller. And so they're not unhealthy, but they aren't like maximizing some nutritional state. So yeah, I think the natural state is over romanticized in a lot of ways, but I also think there are a lot of things that are really good about an animal being in the wild. And so we can get to some of that, some considerations here. So, this means that we must understand the natural history of an animal. So that I'm speaking to the choir here on that one. Then I would argue that you can't just use death or your mortality rate as a metric. So if you look at bearded dragons or pick something even worse, something that mass spawns like a bullfrog, and you say 99.9% of those are going to die within the first year, right? So if you are keeping bullfrogs and you have out of 1,000 live, or 2 out of 1,000, now you're somehow winning the game. That's not a fair way of looking at it, because I would argue that death by predation causes less suffering than a lot of chronic disease, which is the way a lot of our animals die. If they're dying from neglect or they're dying from chronic disease, is significantly more suffering than being snatched up by something. That can still be awful and cause a huge amount of suffering really quickly. But I would argue that it's nothing like living with metabolic bone disease in substandard conditions for multiple years and dying at age 8 instead of age 16 for an animal. You got to compare life, suffering across life stages. So it doesn't make sense to compare a young animal to an old animal, a young animal activity to an old animal in the wild, or vice versa. And another thing is that animals aging out and kept in the wild usually means they get eaten really quickly. And so geriatric issues aren't really a welfare concern in the wild. You got to compare ideal habitat, not human altered habitat. So if you think about like axolotls or electric blue day geckos, things that are mostly extirpated from the wild, but are somewhat common in captivity, you can't say now my standard is lower because their wild habitat really sucks now because of what we did. That would be a very disingenuous way of weaponizing the argument. Meeting this standard for wildcat herps, I would say we just use the same standard, but it's going to be significantly more difficult to meet it because that animal is going to be stressed and hyped up on a lot of things. So it's going to be hard. You're going to have to do something differently to make that animal calm and secure enough in its environment, often, not always, but I'm speaking in generalities, for them to meet that standard. And so that is a challenge. And so a lot of this is more easy to apply to captive bred animals. It also doesn't account for the ability of the animal to harm us or the environment. And so you need to add a separate rubric onto this to talk about large constrictors, dangerously venomous animals, crocodiles, big monitors, not to mention animals that could be invasive or spread pathogen disease to the environment, like chytrid or snake fungal disease or that kind of stuff, right? Which could be through our wastewater or the dirt we're throwing outside if you're not doing it right, not even just releasing the animal. All right, so we're going to try to compare this little beardy out in the wild compared to this beardy in a tank somewhere. How do we even go about doing that? I'm going to use the 5 domains. I think so. This would be an interesting way of expanding this. I've had some good conversations with Phil Leitz at Arids Only on this, of whether this is the right way to use it, right? Because these 5 domains were based not only on mammals, but on agricultural animals. I would argue that when you talked about the 5 freedoms back in the day, now it's these domains that have been expanded, and they have a rather expansive view of the environment and enrichment that I think can be readily applied to reptiles. But so we're going to do that. So what I like about this is that this is the way animal welfare scientists talk. This is the language that like the USDA uses. This is the language that veterinarians use. So that's what's I like about this. And I think it's we can do it. So we're going to talk about, does the animal have good nutrition? How does good nutrition in captivity versus the wild look? Good environment, captivity versus the wild. Good health, captivity versus the wild. And then how do those 3 things lead to appropriate behavior? And if you have appropriate behavior, how does that lead to positive mental experiences? So good nutrition. And I'm using AI images here. So sorry for the people that are opposed to that or notice extra digits on the bearded dragons. But it felt really gross to try to ask permission or steal images from people of bad standards. So I just had a computer generate them. So for good nutrition, is the food nutritious? Is there a variety to it? Is it the right amount? So are they being starved? Are they obese, right? Because of that? Is the water clean? Is it coming to them in the right form? Like fogging versus misting versus raining versus stagnant versus flowing stream. All of those things are really important. And so we have this beardy that's just getting these gross pellets versus this one that has some tropical smorgasbord, right? So there's a lot of things you could do in captivity to expand toward this make-believe paradise as opposed to, that first image. So for a good environment, we're talking about a lot of gradients for reptiles. So a thermal gradient, a humidity gradient with proper ventilation, adding a fan onto things is what a lot of people are doing these days, especially for more humid environments. Lighting gradients and the spectrum, like they're a security and refuge that their ability to tuck back into things. As a person keeping poison frogs, it's the fascinating paradox that the more places they have to hide, the more they're out in the open, right? If they have the ability to, in a moment's notice, move an inch and be completely obscured, they're more likely to sit out on the leaf. And it's a really fun thing about them. Some species hide all the time. But then, substrates. So not just like, do you have it, but how deep is it? Is it the right kind? Is there enough variety? Is there some that's dry, some that's wet? Like what does the animal want, and are you providing it? And then the appropriate space and refuge ingredients, right? So I forgot to say for the last one, for the nutrition, the issue in the wild is almost always that there's not enough, and you have to compete for it, right? So for the good environment in captivity, we might really do a bad job. Like this beardy is just, in a very plain environment. In the wild, they're going to have a perfect environment, but they might have to be really stressed in order to access a lot of it because they're going to have to compete for territory. They're going to have to watch out for predation. And Also, their environment might have natural disasters that they can't avoid. And so they'll die from exposure. They'll die from heat, from cold. They'll die from natural disasters like a hurricane or flooding or something like that, right? So I put this picture in of some beardy in paradise again. Good health. So what is the appropriate body condition and fitness of this animal? And is it free of injury and disease? Does it have access to good medicine, including antibiotics and analgesic and a pain medicine if it needs it? So here we have a beardy.
For those who can't see this, you basically have an anorexic beardy sitting next to Jabba the beardy.
Jabba the beardy.
I mean, it's you can't even see his back feet. You just see this thing's got. I can't say that. It's got things sitting on its belly.
And so what I would say is that most animals, like I would say that, like that crested gecko we were talking about, they're lean in the wild, right? They're fighting. The animal that survives is usually pretty healthy. And if it's not very healthy, it's not going to survive much longer. The ones that you find that look pretty unhealthy. However, they are often like a little bit what we would consider a little underweight from what our ideal is. And they are not free from injury in that a lot of the survivors have scars that they've come through things. Yep. It's just a matter of, was that so bad that then somebody's going to eat you really fast for most of our animals that we keep, versus this little guy gets some veterinary care and, is being checked out by this vet here. So there's definitely health benefits that we can offer in captivity if we do it right. We can clearly cause harm by avoiding, good nutrition and good lighting and all those types of things. So appropriate behavior, here we see your bearded dragon that's just chilling on a little minimalist couch thing, right under the heat lamp, never moving. I would imply that heat lamp's probably only going to get that bearded dragon to like the mid 80s, like it's probably like a really bad heat lamp also. So do they have appropriate opportunity for all beneficial natural behavior? So I'm not going to say that they should be fleeing for their lives from predators. Like that's a natural behavior. But what about beneficial natural behaviors? Like, is there an appropriate stress that they have sometimes that they can overcome? Like for my frogs, I will play them calls of other male frogs of the same species. And sometimes I'll do it for a long time and it'll get them really upset. And they'll come out and they'll strut around and really call. But then I stop and then they win. So does that cause stress? It absolutely causes stress. It certainly causes stress.
To the roof.
Billy has the most confident damn frogs in captivity right now. I love it.
People do this for chameleons too, right? With like mirrors. So this is just like one example of something that could be considered enriching that's actually mildly stressful. But it is beneficial in that it leads to a natural behavior and causes them to do their natural behaviors, and they feel like they're able to express their territoriality without actually being in danger, and without endangering another male frog that it could have put in the tank. And so are they having appropriate interspecies and intraspecies? So intraspecies would mean that the same species. So all of my poison frogs, I cohabitate. And so I have like females that wrestle, but never to the point where it's detrimental to their health and body condition. And I monitor that really closely. Actually, I have had to pull out a male once because it was wrestling and actually was probably calling so much that it wasn't eating enough. The big females were out competing it. Or interspecies interactions, which also includes us, right? How do we stress out our animals, including things like light pollution and sound pollution from our homes that we live in, right? Like this is unnatural in animals right now because usually have a pretty strict no lights on in this room after their lights go out. I have a little night light that I turn on if I need to be in here, and I put on a headlamp. But it also lets me see them doing, the nocturnal animals do the things I want to see, right? It preserves that. So, this little bearded dragon is doesn't have access to do really any appropriate behaviors other than bask under suboptimal heat and light gradients, versus this bearded dragon that's in like a tropical jungle gets to run around on this jungle gym and do all kinds of bearded dragon things. And that's what we should be striving for. However, the wild bearded dragon would also have to compete with others and always be afraid of being eaten. And so those are things that we get to eliminate in captivity. And so how can we provide more? I believe it's Burgart that writes about he calls captivity
I know what you're talking about.
Constrained enrichment.
Deprivation.
Controlled
deprivation.
Controlled deprivation. And so I think it's from the negative stance, but it's a useful way of thinking about it, right? If you are going to take an animal that has an unlimited ability to express its behavior and it's unlimited ability to express its behavior and explore, and you're going to put it in a box, no matter how big that box is, you can't offer it every type of food. You can't offer it every type of experience it would have. You are depriving it of experience, but you're controlling it. And so I would like to add controlled deprivation plus safety or security, right? So you are adding things to that. You're not just controlling the deprivation, you're adding other things to it. So this all leads to positive mental experiences. Got a little bearded dragon sitting there in an empty box that it doesn't even fit in. And so what's its choice in accessing the environment? Like, it's not good if you have a big environment, but it's open, and so the bearded dragon doesn't want to go to aspects of it or can't get to aspects of it. And is it enriched? Isn't stimulating? Versus this bearded dragon that is being taught how to operate a machine to get mealworms, which is awful. I mean, a joke. But bearded dragons actually can learn, do operant conditioning to open switches and get bugs. So I would argue that doing something like that, having that mini amount of stress that the bearded dragon can overcome, is a positive mental experience. And so doing things like taking your animals out in a controlled way where they can eat and have a good experience with you is a positive thing for some animals, not for all animals. So in the wild, they're having positive mental experiences kind of whenever they're existing and not under stress of predation and hunger and drought and famine and all those things, right? And so in captivity, it's really up to us to provide the environment in which they can have those positive mental experiences. So how do they outweigh each other, right? Like, which one are you going to, like, there's no grading scale or checkbox that I can give you. Maybe we could develop that at some point, especially on like by taxon, by species, or by genus, or by family, right? You could like think through things that you really need. And zoos do this when they talk about their welfare standards for specific and care manuals for specific animals. It's based in this way, but they don't say it on this, have you met the minimum, right? They just say what they're going to do. But this is the framework, and this is the way they're thinking about it. They don't use this actual framework. But I would argue we could conceptualize this animal isn't meeting the minimum if they, don't have very much variety in their nutrition. Their nutrition is clearly causing some type of disease for them. They are not able to really move around in their environment. They don't have anything in their environment that lets them have different experiences, including like thermal gradients and light gradients. I think there's a lot of arguments to be made about those, that in that controlled, deprived environment, adding the security and safety of captivity isn't enough of a benefit. And so where you draw that line is going to be an individual. And this is where it comes to, I've now written a couple page consult note for my clinician, and at the bottom I just say, so what do you think? And so it's ultimately up to you to decide what to do with this, right? Does this mean that you get to pat yourself on the back look at me, I'm doing a good job. I wonder how I can do a little bit better in the next year or two as I continue to think about it? Or do you say, my goodness, I have to do a lot better? And it could be that two people looking around a room at the same collection would have a different thought. And that's okay. This provides a language to begin that conversation, is the way I like to think about it. Really quickly, some alternative standards that I don't think work. Minimum enclosure size, already hinted at. It, like, there's so much on how you use that space, right? So we have a one enclosure, two enclosures of the exact same size, one enclosure that almost none of it's usable versus the other one, probably 75% of that is usable space by the animal. Breeding, we hear this. If it breeds, then we know we're doing it good enough. I would say if it breeds, that means you know you're doing something right, but it doesn't mean you're doing it all right, especially as we get animals more generations in and more domesticated. So the picture here is a really obscene picture of a room covered in ball pythons and racks. And you can make some of these hardy ambush predators breed in pretty awful conditions that I would say border on abuse. And that does not mean you're doing a good job. It means that you are doing something. Like, it's better than if you had them in that condition and they couldn't breed, but it doesn't mean that you're meeting an appropriate standard.
Yeah. I've heard that one a lot.
I hear that one a lot.
I want to throw something out real quick. I hope this isn't offensive, but this is just to kind of bring this point, to humanize this point. So we have humans currently that are in prison, right?
Yeah.
They are being denied what we would consider wants and whatever. I would argue that if offered the chance to copulate, they're probably going to do it.
They would be able to. Most of them would be able to.
Yeah.
And I know this got a little weird, but at the same time, you take that person away. You know,
so we've just crossed the prison sex line here on CCR for the first time,
and this time it was me.
This is what it does to you when you interact with ethicists. You start talking about stuff like this.
Who had this on your 2025 bingo card?
Brains in boxes, hitting switches to have trains move in different directions and run people over. Like, these are things that happen when you start talking to ethicists.
And I'm not saying, if I'm saying, like,
no,
that's
I agree.
something to think about. A little bit here. Like, I just never really understood this. Oh, they're procreating, therefore we're definitely doing everything right. Like,
there are some animals even that stress causes more procreation.
Yes.
And so, especially amphibians, you can inject stress hormones and induce them breeding by that, because their instinct is, if I'm going down, I need some genes to keep going. You get past this, right? How can I breed with multiple females and hopefully one of them will survive? And because most of us aren't going to make it out of the season, you know.
So that argument is just from a biological point of view. If you really understand organismal biology, I guess it carries weight with some taxa, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's something that, like, if all of your animals die before they reach sexual maturity, you do have a problem.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's something true about, if they're breeding, you are succeeding at something, but it's not the minimum welfare standard. It means that you are able to do something incredibly basic. I shouldn't say that, because some animals are very difficult to breed. But so, like, on the opposite side, just because you have a Boelen's python that you haven't successfully bred, if you have it in a room-sized enclosure with all of this stuff that is like wonderful enrichment for the animal, I have a hard time saying that's better than having a similar-sized reticulated python in an 8-foot or 6-foot drawer that is pushing all day long, but will breed like crazy. You know, like say they're both 12-foot long animals or whatever, right? That Boland's python that doesn't breed, I would argue, is having a better welfare standard. There might be some small aspect of it that's off that you're able to provide for that retic, but that retic is being deprived of a lot.
Yeah.
Cool.
So these are things that I anticipate people would say are wrong with my arguments. So it would be too subjective. Is that it provides this weird, like, obscene thing where if we're doing better for the animals in captivity, then do we have a duty to go out and capture them and rescue them? I would say no, because an objection that's not actually in here is that idea that it's not the individual animal, it's the population of animals that matter. And so that's definitely true here. And so maybe I need to do it both ways and actually address that a little better. Like, why is it, maybe the suffering of an individual animal in the wild isn't good. Maybe it isn't worth it. Maybe it's only because it allows a population to exist that's worthwhile. And so this all falls apart. That, someone could make that argument. And part of me likes some of that argument. The idea that this all changes with domestication, and we are slowly starting to domesticate some animals more. And so then if they're removed from their natural environment, how can we use their natural environment as a proxy for what to be doing? Nature is not a moral agent. This is kind of the same idea as just because it's natural doesn't mean it's good. But to say that, to push on some of the stuff that Zac said earlier, like, there are all kinds of violent ways humans and other animals reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
That's very natural. Killing things is also very natural. And we have, as humans, a lot of very clear rules and cultural norms against those things, but they're very natural. And so maybe we shouldn't be having predatory animals, could be an objection that you have, right? Like, if it's a luxury to have pets, why would we have pets that need to eat other people's pets? That's potentially an objection a lot in that category, right? But you could use it to take on the whole argument by saying, you just can't use what happens in nature at all as the baseline. I disagree, but I see there's some truth there. You could also say that the standard should be higher, right? That if we're taking them out of their natural environment, we're focusing on an individual instead of a population. We can't, this minimum standard is too low. It needs to be, 50% less suffering than the wild counterpart or something. You can make that argument. Implications, if we actually buy into this, we would need larger and more complex naturalistic enclosures, and we need to understand about how our animals behave. We would need feeder animals that are kept at the same standard. And so that standard would probably be pretty easy to achieve for a lot of insects, but pretty hard to achieve for a lot of rodents in the scale that we would need them. The cost, so it would actually leave open the interesting thing that we should have more feeder reptiles. The cost of captive bred animals would increase because you would be talking about more space and more, if you're going to pay more for those rats that are kept in enriched environments, and you're going to keep your enriched snake in a bigger enclosure, then the babies that you produce are going to cost more. Wild-caught animals should be reserved for experienced herpetoculturalists. We don't need to talk about all this. I have lots of ideas of things I could do in the future. And so this was a slide for a different thing, and things that I would love to work on with Zac and some of his students. But I think there's a whole bunch of things we can do to talk about the positive side of herpetoculture. And so, what benefit does it give to us to be keeping animals? What does it do specifically for people with neurodivergence, so autism and ADHD? Is there a way that we can make this arguably incredibly subjective standard more objective for some people? And then, a whole bunch of more philosophical things that I like to think about. That someone can go to the YouTube video and read. I think that this idea of captive equivalence brings together animal welfare and natural history really well. I think it's a useful thing to think about. It levels a playing field for us to communicate about it. and it's achievable, yet it continues to have us push toward that best interest. And then it's just pictures of my animals. So that's it.
The first frog to make it to CCR that wasn't food.
Oh yeah. Am I the first person that doesn't have any snakes? Doesn't have any colubrids?
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
There you go, man.
That's
I mean, absolutely. You know, I want to share one other thing that ties in. So, and I think the reason that I like that one particular slide so much and just the concept behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a quote that whenever I was working with all these leaders of all these different stores in my previous profession, we would have a district meeting. Obviously, these meetings were not only to go over business, but they were to build morale, to get people pumped, to get them ready to go back and achieve the things we were looking to achieve. And we had a saying in my district that we always ended every single presentation, because there was always a big presentation at the end. Every meeting was ended the same, and it was, we do not expect perfection, but we do require the endless pursuit of it. Yeah. And that to me is kind of what that piece that you had with the arrow pointing over there, what that says is we're never going to achieve it. We're never going to get that perfection, but we should continue to try to move in that direction the best we can and not judge anyone for not being as far along the path as we are.
Yeah. Agreed.
You know, as long as we've got them past that minimum, let's help them continue to move. You know, and honestly, and when I say as far as we are, I guarantee you there's people a lot further ahead than me. You know what I mean? And it's
same.
Roy, we just mentioned Roy earlier. He's leaps and bounds in front of me in the way that he's keeping his animals compared to, you know, where we're keeping. So I just, you know, like I said, that one really, really stuck with me for so many reasons, because it really tied into so much of what I've done, what we do. And I think this piece was just, it was great. It meant a lot.
Cool. Thanks so much for those kind words, and then giving me a platform again. You know, I mean, this is I obviously love talking about this stuff. So yeah.
Well, so I have and we're going over our normal time, but that's fine. I'm enjoying that. So here's my question.
Sure.
I'm thinking of people that might look at this and be like, yeah, but fill in the but. So what about, let me give you a scenario, and I know that this is directly applicable to it, but I'm curious Billy's response to this scenario.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I've talked about it a couple times on the show. All the way back in I love how I say all the way back, but all the way back in 2016, I think it was 2016. That's when I was building the Zoosite collection at West Liberty University. And I had told a lot of people we will not have a Petco collection. And what I meant by that is, you know, we'll have crested geckos, bearded dragons, rose-haired tarantulas back then. But we will have other animals that are more niche, more advanced, because we're at a university where, you know, I want our students to be able to work with both with extremes of a continuum, since we're talking about continuum. And so I got these Timor pythons. And when I got the Timors in, I had done my whole thing, and I bought the Timors, these Reptile Basics enclosures. They were 4x2x2s, and the snakes themselves were like 3 feet long each. They were not big Timor pythons. Sure. And so I did everything based off of natural history. I'm the natural history dude. They had a thermal gradient. They had cork tubes. They had cork flats. They got misted every 4 or 5 days. They went into these enclosures, left them alone for 3 weeks, did everything by the book, and then offered them food, and they didn't eat. And then gave them 10 days off, offered them food, didn't eat. And I was using feeding as my standard of they're not stressed. And if they're not stressed, in theory, you could argue that their minimum has been met. Yeah. Okay. So then,
certainly, if they're unwilling to eat, that's not good.
Yeah, exactly. You need to eat to live. So I did this for 2.5, 3 months. It was a long-ish time, but I also knew boids can go a while without food. And but I got frustrated, and in an act of frustration, thought, I'm just going to do the opposite of what I'm doing right now.
Uh-huh.
You know, and you know, scientifically, for the nerds in the audience, I had my primary hypothesis, and I was like, I'm going to do the null. So I took each one and pulled them out, and I threw them in a rack tub with a cereal box, mulch, and a bowl, and gave them their 10 days, gave them rats, and they ate. And I was like, you sons of bitches. I literally gave you the Taj Mahal, and here you are. And at that time, I was very anti-rack in every way, shape, and form. But that is always the lesson I give the students at school and anybody, where it kind of made me like, okay, something's going on in this tub that was not going on in the enclosure. That has obviously increased their welfare. I did air quotes. That gave them at least the peace of mind to feel like it is safe for me to expose myself to feed.
Yeah.
And then I left them in there, and I thought, okay, they're eating. They ate several meals. They grew. Put them back into the vivariums, changed the vivariums up a little bit. I actually threw in cereal boxes because they like their cereal box. And boom, they went off food again. I was like, put them back in their tubs. They ate. Now, I ultimately moved them on to someone else, not because I felt like I was doing them harm. I could not handle the fact that the rack tub was where they wanted, not where they wanted to be, but where something was being, like, in my brain, that was just completely unacceptable.
Where they were thriving.
Yes. But that was like a pivotal light bulb moment, watershed moment, whatever kind of moment you want to be, where it made me really think about, like, there's this perception of what these things must have. And sometimes that's apparently not what they want.
I think especially
how do you deal with that in this particular instance?
I mean, I think with hopefully the framework is nimble enough to accommodate. And so, and it's dependent on the person using the framework to be gracious enough to think outside the box, I guess, pun intended. So, you know, I think the downfall on one side would be, this is a broken snake because it won't survive in the 4-foot enclosure, as if that is nature, right? The other downside would be, this snake deserves to live in a drawer for its entire life, and that is what it wants and loves, right? Because it could be that I'm hopefully using some like critical anthropomorphism here, right? Like, as we've done multiple times throughout this, right? We're making comparisons to ourselves, but in a way in which we can try to actually embody what it would be like to be the snake. I can imagine that there are some snakes that are just so much less tolerant to stress that they would much rather be cramped than be scared. And some snakes, that's not how they balance it, right? And it's definitely patterns across species, but individual snakes too. And I would
keep going.
So, I mean, you could imagine interesting experiments where, what if you built the drawer system inside of a cage, right? And so then they had the option to do both, a series of drawers. So now they could be in 4 different drawers instead of 1 drawer, right? You could imagine, what if, and I also think that as babies, it's different than as adults, right? So you can't compare the captive welfare of a juvenile snake to what an adult, almost apex predator, except for maybe some big cats in the area. I don't know Timor pythons that well, of what's around there, or big birds or something.
Actually, I'm pretty sure they live on Komodo, so they've got freaking Komodo dragons. They live in other places. But, I think that's right.
So, but probably not very much is going to mess with them when they're
when they're adult, totally
full beast mode, but when they're little, so you can't have in your mind this glorious idea of a full-size adult Timor python. You have to think about, what does the little one do and it probably spent a lot of time being really suboptimal in how it uses its space. And so maybe it makes sense. Maybe the best way for a lot of those, especially if you're going to try to have a few, here's another thing, is how well are you able to take care of them, right? There's something to be said about being able to access your animals. So I don't breed a lot of animals. I breed, I think a dozen or two frogs a year that come out. And now this year I'm having more, but I'm actually getting rid of eggs because I don't want to have that many. But I used to put them in like tanks right away. And when I only had like 2 at a time, it would work. But then I had one drown because I didn't have the foam exactly right in the way. And there was a gap between it. And I couldn't monitor it because I had 10 at a time instead of 2 at a time. And so now I actually keep them in these tiny little boxes for the first 2 weeks until they independently hop around, and I keep them right by me so I can watch them really well. That's not nearly as natural as what I did before.
Yeah,
I have never had one die in this environment. So could someone say I would have a better standard of care if I put them directly into a big enclosure? Because I put them directly into like a 20-gallon enclosure as a tiny froglet, and they do fine. But that's a huge amount of space and a huge amount of time for me to monitor them. And so if I'm going to have 10 at a time, I can't do it. And so I don't think it's worth that when I'm talking about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. It's not worth me only having 2 babies ever at a time so that I can have that standard of care. And so that, I think in some ways, drawers for a period of time makes sense. How do you make them? Add the cereal boxes. And you could also imagine the experiment where every 6 months you increase the drawer size by a certain percentage, right?
I didn't understand their natural history. That's what the problem was.
Okay,
and then I started reading,
and that goes into the basic ideas of the standard anyway, too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because I realized, I think it's called stigmataxa. Taxes.
Yeah. Like
when you want
smash up against things.
Yeah, and a lot of data on that species shows like when you find the juveniles, they basically are like hanging out in a tree hollow, and it's not a tree hollow; it's like they are crammed in there,
crevice. Yeah,
so that if something's going to try to extract them to eat them, they just puff up and they're not coming out. And so that's what the stupid cereal boxes were doing. They were small cereal boxes, so they went in there. So it wasn't necessarily that it was in a 4-foot enclosure. It was the fact that I didn't provide it what it needed in the 4-foot
place to push, against something and feel really contained.
Yeah, and it's funny because there's this part of me that wants redemption, but I don't need Timor pythons. What I need to do is find somebody who has baby Timor pythons, be like, do this, and let me know if it works.
Yeah.
I don't, But anyway,
I mean, I see that even with my single ball python, right? That I kept in a single rack essentially for a while, and now I have in a 4-foot enclosure. And my next project is to take down this bookshelf and make that 6-foot enclosure that's 3 feet tall for it. Does it spend the vast majority of its time inside the 2-inch tall plastic bin that I have buried underneath as a den for it? I have multiple buried around, and there's one that's the warmer one that it likes the most. And does it spend sometimes months at a time in there? Yes, it does. But then there's other times where it's out a lot exploring around. But that tiny den, I tried to put bigger ones. It only wants to go into the ones where it can push against every side.
Yep.
And where it touches the top too. Right. I look at it, I'm like, how does the snake fit in that? Like this is like a slightly over 4-foot, probably almost exactly 4-foot, 4-ish pound snake. Kind of girthy. I don't feel like it can fit in there, and it squeezes in there, and that's the only one it wants. But then to say that therefore you can keep them, doesn't need a hide, the drawer's the hide. I can show you days in a row where the snake spends hours basking, and it stretches out and loves being completely straight in its enclosure, and it climbs. Not like arboreal because I don't give it that option, but it climbs 2 feet. And so, yeah, it's a matter of how do you actually meet the natural history of the snake, and how can you do it in a gradual way that doesn't break the snake. You don't actually, and I say that laughing, because you don't break the snake, you aren't doing what it needs.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. The problem that I had in retrospect, I had big cork tubes and that whole thigmotaxis piece where it was pushing, it couldn't do that. And so they basically, while I had this perception of, look at how amazing this enclosure is, none of the micro habitats needed to make the snake go, oh, we're in there. And so it was just stressed out of his mind. I throw it in a rack, put it in a little light cereal box, and suddenly it can do the thigmotaxis piece, which is what it needed most. And now it's eating. So
I'm learning more from some of my invert friends of like making really small crevices for animals, but then you can still see them, like putting like cork flats and putting magnets on them, and then having them so they go up against the wall, because the scorpion wants to be like smashed in between there, but then you can take it off and see it. Or like whip spiders, like wanting to be right under there. And so I'd imagine even for like small baby snakes, if you designed it right, you could probably make an environment where you can barely find them. And so you'd have to pull them apart to find it. And maybe they'd do okay, but maybe it'd be miserable for you to take care of them, right? So like there's some balance there. The other thing I'd add is that likely, I don't know, but likely most of these animals don't have the ability to think about the future in such a way that they're like, oh, this cramped suboptimal environment is worth it, right? Because in the future, I'm going to be better. You know, similarly about like shipping and going to multiple shows week after week, like those types of things, I think are a thing we need to think about with the stress of that implied in the culture, because the animals only likely know now in the immediate future. And so, you know, we shouldn't ever be abusive to our animals, but if you're providing less of a standard of care that for your babies and juveniles than you do for your adults, I think that makes a lot of sense in some within reason.
Totally. Yep. All right, my friend. Any final thoughts? Well, hold on. I've got a question, and then we'll wrap it. I want to know. So, where do you see the future of herpetoculture? Do you like the trajectory?
I do.
Our final question.
Yeah.
Is it positive, negative? Are there tribes, not tribes?
Yeah, well, there's already tribes, and I can't imagine that as it grows, we'll somehow become more uniform. So I imagine that as it becomes even more mainstream, there'll be a lot more like pet keepers, which I think is great. And some of those will get nerdy and push into this realm by expanding our knowledge of what you can do with 1 to 5 animals, right? But then when I think about herpetoculturists that are keeping a bunch of animals and are spending a huge bunch of time on it, the things I get really excited about are the most excited about are probably twofold. And I've heard you talk about them somewhat recently. The idea that how we acquired new animals is by captive breeding is like a generation ago, right? Like now a lot of what's been done is captive bred, but like getting new animals into the industry, instead of going out and having to import them, and just the cost of doing business is mass die-offs and all the stress of importation, having much more ethical importation process. And so you see that with people that like Dan Maliri having stuff in Southeast Asia where he's acquiring stuff and sometimes even breeding them there. But then I think even like the pinnacle of it is Wakiri and Tesoros doing that type of work in Ecuador and Colombia, where they are breeding poison frogs and other tree frogs in the environment that they normally are. So having massive success doing that. And then they sell them to us with overnight shipping, and essentially like perfect success is in survivability and stress to the animal. And all that money they take and put back into the project and into conservation, which ties into the second thing of the positive things that we can do with herpetoculture. Is like a big category, one of which you all are doing, and I just commend you and think it's one of the best things we can continue to do is supporting real conservation with these efforts. So that's another reason why I love like Wakiri in doing that. But supporting real like education efforts, supporting I think human flourishing is the thing I'm interested in. Like, how does doing a good job being responsible for a living being actually make you feel better? And so thing I'd be interested in studying. And so those are the, like, what's the positive impact to the animal, to the keeper, to society, to the environment? And I think that as this expands, we'll be able to make an even stronger argument that we should encourage people to do this as long as we're doing it the right way that doesn't exploit the animals. And that's what I'm excited about, is I feel like we are, we've learned how to find them and catch them. We've learned how to keep them alive. We've learned how to breed them. And so now the next frontier is, how do we do all of that really ethically? And then how do we expand into showing people how beneficial this is for us and for everyone else?
Damn.
I like it.
I like that a lot. Perfect way to end it. This was fantastic, dude.
All right.
We try to make our listeners think, and if you're not thinking at this point, if you made it to this point about what you're doing, I give up.
Well, come at me and tell me what I could do to make it more interesting. In all honesty, like any feedback, any criticism. I mean, you know as well as I do, Zach, if someone tells you, "Oh, I disagree," like, perfect, new article. Like, tell me the disagreement and I'll approach it with article number 2, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Even better, publish your disagreement and then I can publish a rebuttal.
A rebuttal. Yeah.
But in all honesty, like, message me on Instagram. I love to think about this stuff. I spend way too much time online, so add to it, please.
Will you share how people can get a hold of it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Creepers, herpetoculture. So creepers, like things that creep on the ground. That's the root of herpetos, means to creep. Linnaeus did not like all of these creepy animals, these loathsome creatures that creep. And so I'm embracing that. And Creepers Herpetoculture is on Instagram. It's also on Facebook, but I don't really go on Facebook. I'll go to my Instagram. You can email me, WSVEEN at UMN, University of Minnesota.edu. But Instagram is easier, and honestly, I'll probably see it faster.
Yeah. I tell everybody that, and they look at me like, "But you're a doctor." And I'm like, "I'm also a human."
Yeah. I don't have the notifications to my work email on my personal phone for my own personal flourishing and well-being, but I do have the notifications for Instagram, not just messages from people I've previously messaged. So, but after our first back and forth, then you'll be in that category.
Perfect. Nice. All right, Clint, where can they find you?
All right, on Facebook, it's Clint Bartley, or of course, follow us at Metazotics. On Instagram, it's MetazoticsLLC. You can always check out anything we have available at Metazotics.com. And remember, the anniversary event, August 23rd, all specials will be live on that website. So check us out.
Beautiful. And before I give mine, a couple episodes ago, I mentioned at this point, I think it was, or maybe it was the beginning, that I have false water cobras. And if you're a listener, you get them at a special price. That's actually working. I've had quite a few people reach out, and it really makes me feel good to give them to listeners that reached out to me. That way, if you need coached or anything goes wrong while you're keeping said snake, I'm right there, an Instagram/Facebook message away. So that's going to stand. So if you're interested in a false water cobra, you've thought about this for a little while, we can do a back and forth. Extremely good price for listeners. So there you go. With that being said, you can find me at Dr. Crawdad on Instagram, Zac Loughman on Facebook, and then grad school. We're not going to have that many new openings. So if you're for the upcoming year, the bird biologist, turns out he wants some grad students too, which is probably for the best for, as we've been saying, my mental health. So with that being said, but I will have at least one position outside of the people I'm already talking to. So reach out for that. And if you're in high school or a parent of a high schooler, consider West Liberty University's zoo science major, because I've literally turned it into what I wanted my college experience to be. And I keep saying my team and I have turned it into what I wanted my college experience to be. That's the better way of saying it. So with that being said, be it afternoon, evening, morning, or night, whatever time it is, have a great one. Goodbye.